Thank you for joining us this morning. I'm Jakata Imani, the director of the Center for Spiritual and Social Transformation here at PSR, and this is part of our ongoing webinar series, Theologies of Protest and Resistance. We are taking up where we began with looking at the Black Lives Matter movement, this really important historical moment, thinking about the impact of the criminal justice system on violence on the Black community and Black bodies. I'm joined this morning by Assistant Professor of Worship and Director of Worship Life here at Pacific School of Religion, Sharon Finema.
Hi, everybody.
Thank you for joining us, Sharon. And this is actually in advance of another webinar that we're doing Tuesday, August 4th at 1 p.m. I was looking at the anniversary of Michael Brown's killing and what's going on in the Black Lives Matter movement, what's going on in solidarity, and what faith communities can do to actually do something about white supremacy, do something about police violence, and do something about improving outcome and life pathways for Black and Brown people. You can find out more about that by logging onto our Facebook at Ignite PSR is our Facebook page, and look under events, and you can find out about all of our upcoming events here. Thanks again for joining us, Sharon. I want to start by hearing a little from you about why this movement is, I know you've been out in the streets, you've been in the pulpit, you've been talking about this in your classes. You actually did a course this last spring about Black Lives Matter that was really innovative and interesting. And what about this has spoken and called to you?
I think we had our first class for our immersion class that's looking at Bay Area activism around Black Lives Matter, and then we're going to Ferguson next week to be there for the 1-year anniversary of Michael Brown's murder. And I think as we were introducing ourselves and talking about why we come to this class, why we're interested in doing it, every single person who was there talked about sort of a calling or compulsion or compelling to be involved. And I feel very much that has been my experience. From the very first protest I went to, it was sort of the feeling that I couldn't be anywhere else because of the direness of this, the murdering of African Americans in our country by state violence. And I think that continues to be why I stay involved, is that there are people who are dying, and I have a responsibility to do what I can to prevent that.
Yeah. And what do you think, that faith communities can bring to this really important work that's unique? Like everybody can, lots of us can actually go on the front lines and step up and join protests and be in solidarity with the folks, and particularly the young women and men who are putting their lives and putting their bodies on the line to actually stand up for this. Yeah. Whether it's the Black Lives Matter folks, the Onyx organizing folks, the folks in Ferguson, in New York, in Florida, all over the country. What can faith communities offer specifically, and bring to this important struggle?
I think one of the things that I have noticed in the work that I've been doing is that one of the roles that faith communities and leaders seem to be able to play in the movement is to help remind people about the motivations for why they're doing the work that they're doing, and kind of reconnect people with the core values that are behind the ways they want to participate and the actions that they're doing. I think that's a wonderful role that religion plays in general in society, is connecting us to the deeper meanings of how we engage in the world. And so in this particular movement, I've seen that happen in a lot of different ways, where faith communities have been able to hold the space to reconnect people with why they're there and how they want to be present to the moment, instead of getting caught up in some of the energies and the fears that are being presented to folks as they're doing these direct actions, or they're doing the work that they're doing.
Yeah, it's really important. And again, you direct Worship Life here at PSR, and you're assistant professor of worship. So thinking about what resources would you see, or can you offer folks who are going to be thinking deeply about the worship life of their community and putting together their services for these upcoming weekends that will commemorate the 1 year since Michael Brown was killed.
Yeah, I think one of the things I've noticed about the movement, at least the way that I've participated in it, is the way that it continues to put in front of us the faces, the names, the stories of people who have been killed, and that sort of gesture of keeping in front of us, making present to us lives that would otherwise, and deaths that would otherwise be invisible, and to say this matters to you, this matters to us, has been like one of the biggest blessings, I think, and the most powerful strategies of the movement. So I think one way that faith communities can sort of embody some of those strategies of the movement in their worship is to do the same thing, to keep present to us the names, the faces, the stories of people who have died. I also think that faith communities have ways of remembering. That one of the things that spiritual communities do is help us to remember people that we have lost, or situations that are from the past. So I think using the resources from your tradition that are geared toward remembering things, to commemorating things, this is precisely the time to use those resources. So think about building an altar. That is a tradition in lots of faith communities to remember someone who's died. Ask your community members to bring things that honor the lives of people who've died, that honor the life of Michael Brown. Bring that to your gathering and build an altar together. I was also thinking about the wonderful prints that Ori Original, the artist, has created for many of the people who have died, that have the beautiful sort of black and white prints of people's faces, and thinking about using those as sort of icons in your worship space, and allowing people to go and to touch them, to light candles, to surround yourself with this great cloud of witnesses that are witnessing to the effects of state violence in our midst. I was also thinking about, I love doing worship stuff that crowdsources, so like using Facebook or your church website or things like that. And I was remembering the beautiful poem that comes to us from the Jewish tradition called We Remember. And it talks about at the rising of the sun and it's going down, we remember them. In the blowing of the wind and the chill of winter, we remember them. And there's all these different situations where we remember the people who we've lost. And thinking about using that as a basis for crowdsourcing and asking people to do an act of remembrance, and then share with the community what they did, maybe pictures of what they did or how they engaged with that, and using that and the testimonies that people have from that experience to populate your worship service or your gathering with these stories of how people have remembered.
Yeah, no, that's very powerful. That's very powerful indeed. It comes up for me that there will be two things that people will feel, multiple things, right? One is deep sadness and this sort of grief about the state of our nation. A lot of people I've met, some of my elders and even younger people, are like, I thought we did this. I thought, and so there'll be this grief. Yeah. And I noticed that in myself. And then there'll also be this anger, this sort of like, and I'm thinking, how do we hold that? How do we help people hold, really feel the grief, not pass over that, this sort of the sense that everything will be all right stuff, but everything is currently not all right. It's going to take some time for it to be all right. But then ultimately too, that anger, that frustration, that righteous indignation about just how tough things are, and how unfair things are. How do we help people hold those two things? Do you have any advice for communities thinking about that and who are, dealing with that grief and that anger?
Yeah, I think we, one of the things we struggle most with is how to express anger in the context
Mm,
of community gatherings. And I feel like often we move toward the grief place before actually addressing the fact that people are angry about what's happening, and that is an appropriate reaction to what's happening. Not only appropriate, but it can be serviceable to us in a spiritual way. Um,
mm,
and so I think um, finding ways to express that anger in appropriate ways in the context of community gatherings is really important. I think the last time we had a webinar, one of the things I remember talking about was the sort of tradition in the biblical text about tearing things as
mhm,
part of grief and lament, that people were there are references to tearing clothes or heaping ashes on our head or things like that, and I do think that can be a really powerful expression of anger, is and the sound of it and the feeling of tearing
mhm,
cloth or tearing paper. I think it would be really a beautiful thing to invite your community to write down expressions of anger or things that they're angry about, with relationship to the Black Lives Matter movement, and the need for the Black Lives Matter movement,
mhm,
and then as part of the prayer time, to tear them, to let that anger be expressed and show the shattering that happens when that anger occurs, and then collect those fragments, right? Bring
mm,
them together, hold them together with prayer, and allow that to move us into the fact that communities can hold that anger. That's part of the beauty of gathering in community, is that we can hold that anger, and the holy can hold that anger. God can
yeah.
take it, you know?
Mm. Indeed, indeed. Well, thank you so much, Aaron. Safe travels on as you go out to Ferguson and leading this immersion with students from both here and from uh, out there, and with a few community folks. Super exciting, and thank you for the innovative work you're doing, both in your teaching here as well as in the way that you're leading worship life and being a resource for our communities who are struggling with what it means to be alive in this moment and make meaning. May the Spirit bless and keep you.
Thank you.
Um, thank you. And for all of you, please join us Tuesday, August 4th at 1 p.m. As we'll continue this conversation with activists who've been working on the street, other faculty from PSR, as well as our president, David Vasquez Levy, offering other resources for us as we try to make meaning and make change in this huge, important moment. Thank you all. May the Spirit bless and keep you.